The day had been heavy, the kind of heat that clings to skin like another layer, refusing to let go. I had gone swimming to escape it, cutting through the water in desperate strokes, hoping the silence below the surface might carry me longer than the climb back up into air. But when I returned home, still damp, my hair salted from sweat and chlorine, I only wanted silence. Silence to sit in, silence to breathe, silence to keep me whole. Instead, I found him. He stood in the kitchen, backpack slung across one shoulder, taller than memory, older than the last time his presence filled these walls. My husband was smiling, explaining something about the college being under renovation, about how this arrangement would be temporary, harmless. He framed it as fun, like the old days, when he was only a boy trailing mud on our floors and laughing with a mouth too big for his face. But he wasn't a boy now. His eyes held something that didn't belong to childhood. His body carried a weight shaped not by innocence, but by knowledge, by becoming. Already, the air around him felt unsettled, like a door I hadn't meant to open but now couldn't close. I stood there, damp in my swimsuit, an intruder in my own house. My husband laughed, poured him a glass of water, spoke of dinners, and shared time. I heard only the sound of my breath and the sharp hum of the refrigerator. His gaze flickered toward me, not in greeting, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if he had expected me to walk in exactly this way, at exactly this moment. The room felt smaller than it ever had. The house itself seemed to shift, rearranging its walls to fit this new presence, as though it knew before I did that things would not return to what they had been. Later, when the laughter and explanations thinned into quiet, I carried the weight of his arrival into the bathroom. I turned on the shower, let the heat wash over me, though I couldn't shake the feeling that silence had already left this house for good. He was here, and nothing, not even the water running down my back, could undo the change that settled inside me the moment I saw him standing in my kitchen. The house has always carried echoes of his childhood, the slap of small feet across the wooden floors, the way his laughter used to tumble ahead of him like spilled marbles, impossible to contain. I remembered his open mouth chewing strawberries too fast, juice running down his chin. I remembered scolding him for leaving the screen door unlatched, for dragging sticks in from the yard, for climbing the fence barefoot and tearing his heel open. All those years condensed into a blur of noise and innocence, things that belonged firmly in the past. And yet, when I saw him now, those memories collided with the body standing in front of me. The same person, and not the same. The boy was a shadow that trailed him, visible only to me, while the man pressed forward, his presence impossible to ignore. After my shower, I didn't reach for the familiar cotton pajamas stacked neatly in my drawer. Instead, without conscious thought, my hands sought out the lingerie folded away at the back. Black silk, once meant for nights of intention, now stiff from neglect. I slipped it over damp skin, the fabric whispering against me. It was not for my husband. It wasn't even for him. It was for the pulse in my body that refused to quiet, an unspoken awareness I couldn't name aloud. That night, silence pressed itself against the walls, fragile and deceptive. I heard footsteps in the hallway, his, measured but not tentative. I rose for water, finding him already in the kitchen. His eyes met mine, the air between us brittle with something neither of us spoke. No words, only the quiet stretch of time where everything seemed possible, and forbidden, and close. Accidental touches began to bloom in the days after. A brush of his arm against mine at the counter, the way he lingered just a second too long when handing me a plate. Each moment charged with a weight my body betrayed before my mind allowed permission. Heat pooled low inside me, sparked by nothing more than proximity, by the realization that awareness alone was enough to undo me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was reading into the ordinary, but the ordinary no longer existed. It cracked open with every glance, every pause, every small crossing of invisible lines. The routines of the house persisted, but they no longer felt like mine. Breakfast became a performance, each movement underlined by awareness. The clatter of dishes, the scrape of chairs, the brush of his sleeve when he reached for the sugar, everything threaded with meaning. My husband talked about the news, about bills, about the car needing service, but my attention never settled. It flickered across the room, across the line of his shoulders, across the silence stretched taut between us. In public, nothing looked unusual. Shopping trips, errands, walking through the aisles beneath the bland hum of fluorescent light. It should have been ordinary. Yet every small accident drew me deeper in, his hand grazing mine as we reached for the same basket. The way his gaze lingered, not boldly, but with intent sharpened by restraint. I told myself I was imagining it, but imagination doesn't send heat through the veins, doesn't shift the rhythm of breath. One morning, sunlight caught me bare-shouldered in the kitchen. He looked at me longer than anyone should. A quiet compliment slipped through the air. Not loud, not obvious, but enough. The words wrapped around me, settling deep in the part of myself I thought had gone quiet long ago. I felt it, undeniable, the pleasure of being seen. I began choosing clothes differently, silk camisoles instead of loose shirts, lighter fabric, open at the collar, garments that weren't meant for sleep but for being noticed. I told myself it was harmless, that nothing had happened, that nothing would. But my body already betrayed me. Each decision was a response, though I refused to name it. And then it happened. The first kiss. It wasn't clumsy, wasn't questioned. It came like inevitability. Quiet, certain, dangerously unhesitating. His mouth found mine, as though it had always known the path. In that instant, something broke open inside me. Shame collided with a fierce aliveness I had not felt in years, a spark that burned against the silence of my marriage. After, I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than a slip, a single crack in the surface of ordinary life. But cracks spread. They spiderweb through walls, through days, through flesh. And once you hear the sound of breaking, you cannot unhear it. The bracelet came soon after. A secret gift, delicate, beautiful, slipped into my hand without words. It gleamed against my wrist, a confession I could not speak aloud. But it did not stay hidden. My husband saw it, questioned it. The object became a truth, exposed without explanation. The bracelet was not just metal, it was evidence. It was betrayal made tangible. We went together as though nothing had shifted, as though life could fold itself back into something respectable. Dinner at his mother's house, my best friend, my companion through decades of marriages, children, and seasons that aged us both. I had held him as a baby once, pressed my cheek against the soft crown of his head, sent him birthday cards with cartoon animals and crisp bills tucked inside. Now I sat across from him, guilty, aware, and unable to meet his mother's eyes, without feeling the sharp weight of betrayal pressing against my ribs. The house smelled the same as always, herbs drying on the counter, bread baking, the faint trace of laundry soap that clung to every corner. Nothing had changed here, and yet, inside me, everything had. In the kitchen, when her back was turned, he found me. His voice low, his eyes fixed not on my face, but on the bracelet I wore, the one he had given me. He asked without words, his question sharper than sound. I couldn't answer, not with language, not in that house, but my silence was enough. It was consent, acknowledgement, a deepening of the secret tether that pulled us closer every day. We sat later around the fire, family gathered, laughter spilling into the night air. Nostalgia threaded through the conversation, stories of years gone, of games played in the yard, of nights when he was still small enough to be lifted onto shoulders. No one noticed the shift beneath the surface. No one saw the way his knee brushed mine under the blanket, hidden in the folds of fabric, hidden from every eye but mine. That touch carried more weight than words ever could. Our secret lived in the space between us, alive and growing. When the others drifted to bed, when the house fell into its quiet night rhythm, I could not sleep. I felt the pull, undeniable, drawing me toward the detached guest house where he stayed. The path outside was cool, gravel crunching beneath my steps, the air thick with the smell of damp earth. My hand hesitated on the door, but only for a breath. Then I was inside, standing in the dimness, the silence breaking apart with the beat of my pulse. This time, there was no accident, no slip, no question. We kissed with intention, with certainty, with the weight of all the unspoken nights behind us. His hands on me were not tentative. Mine on him were not restrained. The line we had skirted, teased, and tested was crossed fully, irrevocably. The air itself seemed to shudder with it. In that space, in that bed, with him, I ceased resisting. I gave myself to the inevitability we had both carried since the moment I walked into my kitchen and found him standing there. We came back to the house as though nothing had happened, but everything had changed. The walls seemed to hold the memory of that night, the weight of it seeping into every corner. The silence between us was no longer avoidance. It was a pulse, a promise deferred. When our eyes met, there was no question of what had been done, only the knowledge that it would not be undone. My husband tried. He brought flowers, awkward in their brightness, petals too loud against the stillness of the kitchen. He suggested dinner, tenderness, small rituals of repair. I let him hold me, let his hands linger, his lips graze my skin. But my body knew the difference. It responded with patience, not hunger, with endurance, not fire. Every touch was a mirror showing me what I had already lost with him and what I had found elsewhere. The boy, no, the man, moved through the house with careful distance, but never far enough. He did not speak of what had happened, but his presence pressed against me with each quiet act, his arm brushing mine as he passed the coffee pot, his hand steadying me on the stairs. The sound of his door opening late at night. He said nothing, yet everything was there. The truth vibrated beneath the surface of ordinary life, alive in every gesture. At breakfast, he sat across from me, chewing slowly, his gaze flicking up only when my husband looked away. The smallest tilt of his mouth, the faintest suggestion of memory, and I was undone. The cereal bowl in front of me became impossible to see clearly. The air itself seemed to thicken, dense with what was unsaid. I wore the bracelet still, though my husband had asked about it. I told him it was nothing, a forgotten gift, a trinket misplaced and found again. But I could feel the lie resting against my skin, heavier than gold. It was no longer an object. It was an admission I carried openly, daring him to notice, daring him to know. The days blurred, ordinary in their motions but fractured beneath. I went shopping, cooked meals, folded laundry. I smiled when spoken to, nodded when required. But my mind was elsewhere. My body lived in the memory of that night, in the certainty of the way his hands had moved, in the promise that silence could not erase. Routine returned, but it was a shell. Inside it, something darker, fiercer, more alive kept beating, waiting to be claimed again. It came quietly, the announcement that he would be leaving soon. An internship, a chance to step outward, to build the life waiting for him. My husband clapped him on the back, spoke of opportunity, of how proud everyone must be. I nodded where expected, smiled where required, but inside the ground tilted. The countdown had begun, each day now marked by the inevitability of his absence. Our exchanges sharpened, words layered with recognition neither of us dared to speak aloud. He caught me alone in the hallway, his shoulder brushing mine as he passed, the touch deliberate this time. His eyes held mine long enough for the truth to land heavy between us. I felt the question I could not voice. What would remain when he was gone? One night, with the house asleep, I found myself whispering what I had never intended to confess. It wouldn't matter what I wanted. That was the truth I lived with, the truth that defined me. Wanting had never been permission. And yet, my body betrayed me, pressing me toward him even as my mind told me to resist. We met again before dawn, drawn by the pull that refused to release us. The air was damp, the kind of early morning that makes the world feel hushed, unformed. He touched me as though there was no time left, each movement urgent, deliberate, heavy with the knowledge of ending. I felt my own desperation spilling out, clinging to him, as if my body believed it could hold him here by force. When I whispered not to make it feel like goodbye, he obeyed. His hands anchored me, his mouth against mine, refused farewell. We moved with the weight of finality pressing us closer, our intimacy threaded with sorrow and defiance. It was not careless now. It was deliberate, chosen, shadowed by the ticking clock that marked our days together. Every time after that carried the same heaviness. We no longer pretended it was accidental or fragile. It was intentional, and it consumed us both. The shadow of his departure loomed larger with each touch, each kiss, each quiet moment stolen in the folds of routine. I knew the end was coming, but still, I let it happen. I let myself be carried further to the edge because stepping back felt impossible, unthinkable, already too late. The last day arrived with cruel ordinariness. Sunlight poured through the windows, bright and careless, as though it didn't know the weight it carried. I avoided him, keeping to rooms where the air felt less charged, less final. My husband suggested a walk, a picnic, gestures meant to stitch something back together that had long since come apart. He was cheerful, almost tender, unaware of the fracture that widened beneath his feet. I nodded, agreed, moved through the day like a woman playing herself in a role she no longer recognized. The suitcase stood by the door, his backpack slung again over one shoulder, heavier now, filled not only with clothes, but with everything we had done, everything we had crossed. He lingered in the driveway, waiting, not for anyone but me. I hesitated at the window, then stepped outside, pulled toward him by something that felt like inevitability. He handed me an envelope. Inside, a photograph. Me by the lake, sunlight catching my collarbone, my hair lifted slightly by the breeze. I was laughing, unguarded, alive in a way I had not seen myself in years. In the corner of the frame, blurred, he stood watching me. Not the landscape, not the water. Me. The note was short, written in his hand, the words simple but searing. You looked alive with me. It was not a plea, it was not a promise. It was a truth, laid bare in ink, a mirror I could not look away from. He leaned in, kissed my cheek, nothing more. And yet that single gesture undid me more than all the nights we had shared. It was gentle, final, devastating. A goodbye that refused to close, that lingered like a hand pressing lightly against a wound. I watched him drive away, the car shrinking into distance, leaving silence in its wake. Not the silence I had once craved, not the silence of peace, but the silence of absence, thick and merciless. Inside, my husband waited with plans for dinner, for small repairs to a marriage already beyond repair. I moved through the motions, but something within me had shifted irreversibly. I could not return to who I had been before him. I carried him with me, not as a lover, not as a boy I had once known, but as the proof that I had not been dead, not entirely. The world looked the same. The house looked the same. But I was not the same, and I could no longer pretend otherwise.